MorphoMetrics, and session promises to be a thought-provoking discussion on the interplay between space data and urban evolution. We are also honored to have Professor Aniruddha Paul, who is with us and who will be moderating this session. His expertise and perspective will help us to guide our discussion, ensuring that we make the most of this valuable learning experience. As you're aware, this webinar series serves as a precursor to the Transformations 2025 conference, uh, where we will engage in comprehensive discussions on the future of urbanism, sustainability, and architectural innovation. We hope that today's session will spark new perspectives and encourage meaningful conversations as we move closer to the conference. I am also thrilled to announce that Dr. Sergio Porta will be conducting an exclusive workshop, hands-on workshop from June 24th to 26th, which will be just before the official start of our Transformations 2025 conference. This begins on the 26th of June, and this workshop will provide a unique opportunity to engage with cutting-edge concepts under his guidance. I'm happy to share that this workshop will be completely free of charge, and because there are limited seats, they will be allotted on a first come, first served basis to the registered delegates of the conference. Registration for the workshop is mandatory, and we will share the registration details and the key information regarding this workshop maybe during or before the next webinar number 8, which is scheduled on 10th of April. I urge you all to attend all sessions of the pre-webinar series henceforth, and also uh, be with us, register for the hands-on workshops. In addition to the workshop by Dr. Sergio Porta, we will also be having another workshop by Dr. Krishnamurti. Again, the details of the same will be shared with you shortly. Additionally, all participants who complete the workshop will obviously be awarded a certificate of participation from the Council of Architecture. So I urge you all to take advantage of this incredible opportunity to learn, collaborate, and enhance your expertise. Thank you all, and a warm welcome once again.
Thank you so much, ma'am. I'll just take a moment to introduce our speaker and moderator, our expert and moderator. Dr. Sergio Porta, graduated in architecture and PhD in urban and environmental planning at the Polytechnic of Milan, visiting scholar at University of California at Berkeley, USA, currently professor of urban design, director of urban design studies unit, course director of MSc UD program at the Department of Architecture of University of Strathclyde, advisor to international organizations, member of editorial books of leading journal in urban science and design, section editor of urban morphometrics and design at the journal Discover City, Springer Nature, and regularly invited speaker to international conferences. He has published several papers on his international career, reviewed journals, and 3 monographs. His latest book, Master Planning for Change, Designing the Resilient City, was published in 2020 by REPA. And our moderator, Anirudh Paul, completed his BH from Calcutta and his MArch from SPA New Delhi. He is presently professor at Krivya, Mumbai. Through his work at Krivya, he has been involved in research projects and various stakeholders like government, CBO, and communities to inform and provide alternative imagination for sustainable urban futures. He has also presented papers at conferences, organized workshops, and published in this field. He has been part of advisory government committees that inform and frame policies on architectural and urban projects. Presently, through Spark, he is working on climate change mitigation projects called Closing the Loop, planning nature-based, decentralized wastewater, sewage, and solid waste system for villages of peri-urban Mumbai metropolitan region. So I welcome both of you, and Sergio, over to you, and let's begin our expert talk. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Let me try to share my screen. Shall I replace the current share? I try to do so. Yeah. Hopefully this will work. Are you, let me see. Are you seeing my screen right now?
Yes, Sergio. Just a small announcement, Sergio, before we start.
Yes, please.
Let me take a moment. Kindly, all participants, write your name in the chat box so that we come to know. Thank you, Sergio. And
So that is
please.
for issuing the.
That is for issuing the certificate, of course. Thank you so much.
Can I go?
Yes.
Thank you. So first of all, let me thank all of you. Let me thank Professor Jayashree Deshpande and the Council of Architecture of India. I'm thrilled to be here. I'm honored to have been invited here for this occasion and also to the conference and to running this workshop. The combination of these events is really exciting for all of us, including Ombreta Romice, who's not with me now, but she's cool for everything I'm going to say. And also she's going to have an option for speaking in this series of webinars, I think, on the 10th of April, if I'm not wrong. Correct me if I'm wrong. So looking forward to her contribution as well. Let me thank the organizers of the Transformation 2025 conference. Mary Thomas, in particular, I've been in touch with nearly every day recently, and the DYP School of Architecture. And let me thank finally Anna Rudapol and Mariusz Gorey for moderating this webinar. Thanks so much for helping me today. And finally, all of you, I read there are more than 50 people online, so thanks for being here at this webinar to attend what I'm saying. So, starting off, it's about urban morphometrics, technological innovation for evidence-based evolutionary design, a rather complicated title, I'm afraid. I'm going to cover 5 strands of topics. The first one is the characterization process, and the second one is the master planning process. And the idea is the characterization process would be the heart, or should be the heart of the master planning practice. And I hope over this talk, you're going to understand what I mean with that. And then I'm going to delve into urban morphometrics, which is probably the core of the presentation. And the reason is that urban morphometrics is, in fact, a technological innovation. And technological innovation, or disruptive even technological innovation, is the theme, the overarching theme of the conference. Then I'm going to talk of urban design coding, which is the way this links back to design. And then I'm going to close up, if I have time, with Urban Evo Devo, which is how can I put it? It is a project which is starting as we speak, and it goes to the heart really of why we are talking of this and why we are approaching urban design the way we do, and why we have done that in the last 15 years at the very least, more than that actually. Right, so let's start off with the characterization process and the heart of the master planning practice, and let's start with a rather obvious statement, that is that cities are or can be marvelous formations of amazing complexity, which do not cease to leave us speechless for one thing in particular, which is their endless diversity. There are billions of settlements, trillions of buildings and streets and parks, but no one is same to any other. Not really. For example, we may say that Los Angeles has a density of 25 units per hectare, and we see that on the left-hand side of the screen, while Paris, for example, the right-hand side of the screen has 400 units per hectare. We can use a denotative language in doing so, which is numbers, or we can say that Los Angeles is a bit monotonous, if I may, while Paris is spectacular. Connotative language, even slightly emotional. But if you look more carefully, we see that cities are not only different from each other, they are also different internally. Or more appropriately, that any city is made of areas that show different characters. And all these images, for example, are taken from the same city, the city of Rome in Italy, and nevertheless, they couldn't be more different from each other. So as for diversity, cities show degrees of it, both at intercity and especially at intra-city level, so within the cities themselves. And all of that is actually very well known because diversity attracts attention. Diversity is what everybody sees effortlessly because it is about noticing exceptions, which we are all naturally wired up for, or so it seems. However, beside what sets neighborhoods and cities apart from each other, we can also see shared patterns of form emerging within cities at intra-city level, most of which also can be observed across cities at intercity level. And indeed, some patterns are actually specific of one city only. You don't find them anywhere else, but most actually recur over two or many or even all cities in the planet. And most importantly, if you look at what makes the character of an urban area, what makes it distinctively recognizable and makes it working well, or indeed less so, this is exactly the underlying structure of the urban form, information, the part that is shared locally, regionally, nationally, and even globally. The underlying patterns that emerge in their urban form. If you want to identify the character of a place, you need to switch your brain from what emerges to the foreground, which is the singularities of the cities, to what lays to the background, which is their regularities or what is shared. Excuse me?
Oh,
Sorry, it was that for me?
I request all the participants to mute their mic.
Okay, thank you. So I was saying that if we want to identify the character of places, the one that really is linked to their functions, they function, the way they work and the way people perceive them, we need to switch our brain from the singularities to the regularities. So to what is shared of the ordinary urban fabric between different areas in the same city or between actually cities as a whole. So we have to switch our brain to recognize the patterns of urban form. And these patterns are the recurrent ways with which the elements assemble in a whole that is distinctively typical. The distinct and unique way in which they are homogeneous, or indeed the same distinct and unique way in which they are heterogeneous, or anything in between. This is what really counts, or what really we focus our attention on. So this is an image of Siena, for example, on the left-hand side of the screen, which tells us of a very homogeneous built environment, while Glasgow on the right-hand side, in this part of Glasgow at least, conveys an image of heterogeneity, and yet with some character in it. And there is a profound reason for this interplay between diversity at the visual level and similarity at a deeper structural level to occur in cities so regularly over all kinds of cities everywhere in the world. And the reason is that urban form is a product of cultural evolution, human cultural evolution. As such, it works according to evolutionary rules, exactly like other complex adaptive systems in nature, culture, and society. And then we have already named evolution a few times so far. We have done so somehow generically, but indeed not lightly, I hope. We dedicated, in fact, a significant amount of energy in the last few years to actually bridge evolution in urban form to evolution in natural, cultural, and social systems, in particular to bridge urban morphology and systems ecology. In fact, it turns out urban form seems to show all characteristics of a complex adaptive system of the same class as the social, cultural, economic, and properly environmental systems that urban form grows up with. And as such, urban forms seem changing according to the panarchy described in systems ecology. At scale, which is on the left-hand side of the screen, you see that change occurs along what is called an adaptive cycle, which roughly develops in 4 phases. And names have been attributed to these 4 phases. I'm not going to get deeper into that, but they are called exploitation, conservation, release, and reorganization on a closed cycle. And this idea developed independently in system ecology resonates profoundly, though, with the Burgage cycle. Just to make an example, there are many examples of that, which in this case was described by M.R.G. Konzen in urban morphology. M.R.G. Konzen is one of the great fathers of the discipline. And however, across scales, to the right-hand side, change occurs along the double track of the panarchy system, so-called, where conservative, top-down, and innovative, bottom-up, super cycles interact by connecting the individual adaptive cycles at scale as they continue to unfold over and across all the scales. And like if that was not complex enough as a picture of reality, the reality of urban form, we observe also that adaptive cycles at different scales, they roll forward at different speed, roughly very much like in living organisms. Also in urban form, we observe an allometric rule applying, whereby the smaller the scale, the faster the change, and obviously the larger the scale, the slower the change. And change apparently occurs faster with buildings and plots, for example, and slower with roads and districts. And that means that every time we look at a city, and you look at that, imagine that you cut a vertical line along the diagram to the right-hand side at any point of this diagram. And that gives you a sense of what you perceive in one moment, what your experience actually is driven by at any point in which you experience the city, for example, from the human eye level. At any point, this vertical line would cut across all these scales of change, which in reality occur all at the same moment, in parallel, and all of them following their own speed of change, so being at different points in this cycle at the same time, at the same moment in time in which you perceive them. So this also explains why the larger scale is conservative, because these cycles very rarely align across scales. So the lower scale changes are effectively hindered in most cases, or even prevented in most cases by what's going on at the higher scale, at the larger scale. Okay, this is a bit of, if you like, I wouldn't call it technicality, but as I thought that diving a little bit into the complexity of these mechanisms would be informational. But what do we see, in fact, before our eyes every time we experience the city? We may, for example, see a relatively stable situation at mid-large scale coexisting with a booming situation at mid-low scale. Here we can see these three scales simultaneously at work in Barcelona, with the enduring road structure, very stable in time, established by the Plan Cerdà in 1853 to the top left. Some would say rather boring, in fact. They look very boring, although these blocks are identical to each other and they repeat themselves identically. How boring this is. And nevertheless, you can see how that triggers the incredible variety of individual projects that we currently can experience if we look at the same space, at the same city as the crow flies, and even more so if we delve into the eye level perception of the street. So you got this incredible, coexistence of diversity at one level, which is also growing on the ground of what happens at the larger scale. And the larger scale, nothing changes apparently in more than a century and a half. And nevertheless, see how this framework or this trellis, using David Rublin's metaphor, how this generates and triggers the amazing diversity of a very successful city such as Barcelona. So in terms of urban morphology, how can we frame this? The matter that design deals with, because that's what design does all the times. It generates form. It generates the shape, the tangible shape of the urban material. So we recognize that, or we may, that's what we do at least. We recognize the 6 levels of scale. The district, the sanctuary area, which is the area of the city which is encompassed and defined by main streets, not all streets, main streets. And then we got the streets themselves, we got the blocks, the street edge, which is the aggregation of plots served by the same street. And then we have the plot. And of course, in this list, we move down from the top level, the larger scale, to the smaller scale. And this approach to the model of change in systems, which was developed roughly at the same time in system ecology and urban morphology, but independently from each other, completely independent from each other, is shared very significantly in the foundational literature of the fathers of both disciplines, system ecology and urban morphology itself. Now, in our latest book, which was just mentioned by our introductions, the Master Planning for Change, that is how it's called, published by the Royal Town Planning Institute in 2020, we explained in detail all these things and how we can master plan cities in a way that takes advantage of these facts and works with rather than against the adaptive nature of the urban form. Embedded in the Master Planning for Change design process, because this is what the book eventually is about, at the core of it, we have placed a coding engine that ensures the emergence of endless diversity within the unity of the same coding framework. In short, the co-presence of the unity and diversity that in fact is the signature, technically speaking, of everything evolved. We call this coding engine local urban code, or LUC, and we have been working with that now for nearly more than 15 years, actually, looking backward to when I still was in Glasgow even. So the book is about that, is about how we can work as designer in a framework that acknowledges the evolutionary nature of a city. How can we design something that evolves continuously? What is our position in that? That is a very, very tricky question in many ways for us as urban designers. So what is a local urban code then? Well, very shortly, the local urban code is a repository of information that describes the urban form at plot to block level, which we want to take as a reference when we design new developments or regeneration. And this information is numerical, it is systematic, though in the local urban code format, still not comprehensive and not scalable enough. And we will see in a moment that this is that the development of local urban code into a more comprehensive and scalable tool is what we did with the urban MorphoMetrics more recently. And this is another point I want to make, which I will come back to this later in this presentation. It is about coding. The information source from the urban form itself is then translated into design codes for architects and developers and everybody else to work with. The coding system is brought all the way down to the level of the plot by way of what we call the plot passport, and others as well, the plot passport mechanism. It is because of the coding system that we can point our design efforts only to the structure of spaces, again, what David Radden called the trellis, while stepping back from everything else, which we called the roses, or the roses in the same metaphor of the trellis. As for the roses, in fact, it is for society at large to shape and reshape constantly in time. Landowners, architects, developers, engineers, electricians, inhabitants, housing associations, community leaders, local planning officers, and so on and on and on. Complexity is astounding. It's just breathtaking. It is endless. We can't design that. But what we can design is, in fact, the structure, the trellis. Can't design the roses, but perhaps we can have a good look at the trellis, can't we? And in terms of the master planning process, again, the result is a carefully granular spatial structure that is introduced in the making itself of the plan. As you can see in this master plan of a larger district of Glasgow, as you can see, nothing that would strike you as an intellectual bomb at first sight, which for us is actually a plus, I have to say, but instead a sense of composed, hopefully appropriate and timeless city designed for being adaptive and therefore organized around what is human and what simply makes sense. Or you can term it in a sort of higher way, you can define that as grasping the collective wisdom, which is embedded at that level, at a profound level, in the form of the city. All right, then. So far, we have introduced a few essential elements of the context, intellectual context and practical context as well, of what I want to tell you in particular today. And what I want to tell you about in particular today has to do with this recent research outcome I just mentioned, a technological innovation, the name of which is urban morphometrics. And before approaching a short description of this achievement, it is important to keep in mind where it comes from, that the reason why we have come to discovering it is that while being engaged with our students in development of design, in design terms, of all I just said, we felt acutely the need for something that did not exist yet. And that is a scalable method for the comprehensive numerical description of urban form, a direct development of the local urban code. In a nutshell, the urban morphometric is a digital ecosystem that generates the numerical taxonomy of urban form comprehensively and at the very, very large scale at the same time. Fundamental problems that we had to face in the making of the method were, for example, the identification of the morphometric elements that we needed to describe in order to capture the urban form as a phenomenon, or the definition of the operational taxonomic unit, which is the lowest ranking taxa correspondent in biology to the individual or the population, depending on the taxonomic level at which you conduct your analysis. Now, let me, in this chapter on the urban morphometrics, I'm going to get a little bit deeper into it. And of course, not expecting, try to follow me, even if you don't get the whole of it, at the first phase, because this is not the point. The point is just giving you a hint of what lies, in the backstage to what you can actually see at the end, like the product of the work. So let's make a step into this direction. For example, the morphometric elements, urban morphology literature consistently indicates that 3 elements are primarily constituent of the phenomenon of urban form, and these are very simply buildings, streets, and plots. And here is a problem, because if building and streets are straightforward, relatively straightforward, okay, there are nuances there, but they are relatively straightforward intuitively. We can grasp the meaning of them because we have relatively uncontroversial geodata vectorial information describing these 2 elements, and we can access those consistently at very large scale, but the same, quasi-consistently. The same cannot be said of the plots. The plots are regularly defined in different ways across different regions and national states, and are therefore difficult to retrieve consistently across cases at very large scale. And moreover, such descriptions are often inaccurate. In the end, we decided to dismiss the plot altogether and instead to generate internally a spatial unit of analysis that we could use as a proxy of it, as a proxy of the plot. And we decided to generate such unit from the footprint of the buildings themselves and to call it morphological tessellation or tessellation cell or simply cell. And this is simply a Voronoi tessellation process applied to the polygon of the building footprint. The resulting morphological cell defines the space of pertinence. This is the concept that gets embedded into these geospatial elements. So the space of pertinence of each single individual building in relation to the surrounding buildings and streets. And this is how morphological cells look like. In a notional case, each cell is generated around one and one only building, and each building sits on one and one only cell. A good property of the morphological cell is that they fill the space of the study area entirely. There's not one single square centimeter which is left over. They fill that entirely and contiguously. Because of that, we can define for each cell the aggregate of all cells that are contiguous to it up to an n order of contiguity, which we decide. We call this boundary the context of the cell. And in this image, we can see the context of 2 cells located in different areas of the city of Prague. With that, in fact, one is more historical area and the other is a more outskirt or peripheral area of the city. And each of these have their respective context. And these images are, of course, at the same scale. So you can notice that both contexts are of the third order of contiguity. But as you can see, the purely topological nature of distance, which is not metrical in this case, it's a topological number of steps involved in the generation of the context, results in very different extents. So the size of the context are very different depending on the granularity of the urban form, which is a character of the form itself. So contexts are therefore locally sensitive in this model. And finally, we conducted comparative studies across cases where we had a reliable information on the real plots, which you can have somewhere. And we conduct in Prague, for example, we had this case, and we concluded that the validation was positive and that the tessellation cell is in fact a proxy or can be used as a proxy of the plot. And it is the kind of proxy of the plot we were looking for. So with that conclusion, we had completed the three morphometric elements of urban form, again, buildings, streets, and cells, or plots, in fact, and we could move forward to measure them. Now, for scalability purposes, we also needed a way to measure these things, which needed to be extremely parsimonious. Extremely parsimonious because in terms of input information, and again, for scalability purposes, you can't even imagine to, map entire continent or the entire planet. At least we have the potential to do so. If we don't reduce the input information dramatically. So we reduce it to the real bone of it. Our model, the MorphoMetrics model, works with two only geodata layers. The first is the building footprints, and the second is the street network. And to be honest, we also use a third information, which is the height of the building, which is an attribute of the building footprints, whenever we can have it. And nowadays, recently, this information at the global scale, in fact, is becoming increasingly available for free. So this is something that is really positive and really, makes our work easier. So from those two layers only, two informations, building footprints and streets, we generate internally 74 primary metrics of urban form, or as we call them, primary taxonomic characters. Again, those 74 characters describe the three elements of urban form: buildings, morphological cells, and streets. Where did we get those characters, though, or descriptors? Where did we get them from? We committed ourselves to be as comprehensive as possible. We wanted to refrain from a very, very common practice, which is the pre-selection of metrics according to theories or personal values. Ideally, we wanted to use all of them, like if that thing existed. But the tension is to actually use all the available metrics, all the metrics existing in urban morphology literature to describe the form of cities. And in order to do so, we embarked into a systematic literature review where we found hundreds of metrics and cleaned them up to eliminate redundancies and inconsistencies, which were, both of them, just endless. So in order to find a way out from that maze, we had to invent a new denomination protocol and rename all the metrics found in literature according to such protocol. And that allowed us to spot the repetitions and the inconsistencies hidden under a highly volatile metric denomination. We called the protocol the Index of Elements protocol. And what you can see here is an extract of the resulting list of 74 primary metrics that we eventually retained and adopted after cleaning the original set up. Actually, the process has been much more laborious, but this is the essence of it. So the list, needless to say, is open and continuously updated to integrate new metrics. And for that, I would refer to Martin Fleischmann's monpy.org website, which is a repository of the codes that we use. You can find all the codes that you can use in Python language, and you can use that as you please. So this set of metrics spans over 6 categories of traits, visible traits, and these categories are the dimension, their shape, their spatial distribution, their intensity, their connectivity, and finally their diversity. All these 6 categories are made of a certain number of metrics that we use to describe the urban form, and these elements, the 3 elements of urban form. You can see here examples. Sorry, I'm afraid I'm seeing on the screen arrows and things which I'm not sure if I have generated, not willing to do so. Anyway, I'll keep going and then perhaps somebody can try to clean it up. Anyway, so these metrics are attributed at the tessellation cell level, which means that we are generating all these metrics for each and every building in the case study. And however, each metric is measured from each cell within a spatial boundary that depends on the scale at which the metric itself is measured. For example, when you measure a street or the street connectivity, you may go all the way up to the entire case study, while when you measure, for example, the alignment of a building to the solar cycle, that you measure at the level of the single individual building. So these metrics actually are measured at the small, medium, or large scale, just to be very simple, right? From each of the 74 primary characters, we then calculate 4 contextual characters: the interquartile mean, interquartile range, Simpson diversity index, interdecile index. So these indices are 4 indices that actually look at the trend of each of the 74 primary characters in the neighborhood, so in the context, as I call it just a moment earlier, of each and every cell. So you go to a cell, you measure these 296 characters, which are contextual over the whole context of that cell, then you move to the next one and you do the same, next one you do the same, and so on until you have finished the entire set of cells in the case study. So the result is 296 contextual characters, which are measured in this way for each building in the case study. Right, so to sum it up, this is a classic, if you like, urban morphometrics workflow. A session goes, as you can see here, we start from 2 input data from which we generate the 3 morphometric characters, buildings, streets, and cells, proxies of the plots, plus the blocks. We describe these things with those data, and we compute the 74 primary metrics from which we derive the 296 contextual metrics. Then we cluster all the cells by similarity. This is very important. We're going back to this in a moment, according to their description on 296 dimensions. And this equates to the detection of the OTU, which is the operational taxonomic unit, which is the individual tissue or distinct homogeneous cluster. Similar tissues or urban types constitute the taxa according to which the taxonomy is realized. I know this sounds a bit abstract, but we're going to see an example in a minute, and you understand what the urban tissue is and what the urban types are. It is therefore the urban type that takes the role of operational taxonomic unit in urban morphometrics. An urban type is defined as a part of cities that show a distinct combination of visible traits. It is recognizable on that basis. So, all right, what do we do? What do we make of all this? What is the result of a typical urban morphometric analysis? Well, let's start by saying one thing first, that when we talk of 74 primary characters, it means that we actually calculate all of them in each case study. And a case study can be as small as a neighborhood and as large, and I'm talking of things which have been realized already, as large as 4 national countries in Central Europe for more than 80 millions of buildings. And by the end of the year, our former PhD student and dear friend Martin Flashman in Prague is going to realize a larger aggregation which is going to count in the region of 160 million building, bringing together, well, I'm going to talk about that in a minute, bringing together 8 nations, national territories in the center of Europe. So this is an application to Trondheim in Norway. Okay, you see these are maps of examples of the 74 primary metrics. For example, this is the measure of local measuredness, which measures the kind of connectivity of the street network, right? And this is a measure of building orientation. This is a measure of the proportion of cul-de-sacs in the context as a proportion of the number of intersections. And these are part of the 74 primary characters. Same time, we have the mean of granularity of cells and the range of the same thing, granularity of cells, and the local diversity of the same thing, granularity of cells. And these are trend, so we call them contextual metrics. So you can see here 3 of the 4 that we produce out of each of the primary. The primary in this case is granularity of cells. From the measurement of the granularity of cells, which is one of the 74 primary characters, we here produce 4, of which you see 3 contextual characters. Now, these contextual characters describe the trend of it. In this case, for example, it describes the mean of this indicator within the context of the cell. Okay. Stay with me for another 5 minutes or even less than that, and then it's going to get more easy to follow. Anyway, mean of coverage area ratio, range of coverage area ratio, local diversity of coverage area ratio, the same thing we have just seen in the previous slide, just refer to a different indicator or one other of the 74 primary indicator, which is the coverage area ratio, rather than the granularity of cells, right? And there we go. So this is the result of a typical session, one of the outputs, probably the most important. And you can see here the map of Trondheim with different color, like a patchwork of colors. Each color identifies an urban type, so an area which is internally homogeneous, all dishomogeneous in the same way, in a consistent way and distinctive way. And these colors, the colors of the urban types, are also replicated in the dendrogram that you can see here on the left-hand side of the screen. And the dendrogram is just a way to visualize how different urban types are similar to each other. And we can calculate the similarity statistically because each urban type is described by a numerical profile, right? It's a numerical description. That's why we can use statistics to understand how similar urban types are. And I don't know to what extent you are familiar with what a dendrogram is and how to read it, but very, very quickly, you have on the x-axis the urban types, in this case identified by a number, right, from 0 to perhaps 15 or 16 actually. So we got 17 urban types from 0 to 16. And these urban types are here on the x-axis, and on the y-axis you have the level of dissimilarity between them. And the way it works is that you take, for example, urban type 3 and urban type 12. They are not the same urban type. They are 2 different types of urban fabric. And they meet up at this level in the dendrogram, which means that they are scarcely dissimilar, which means they are very similar. So the lowest is the point of encounter of a couple, a pair of urban types. The lower is the point of encounter and the more similar they are. So, for example, urban type 1 and 7, we see that they are very similar, while urban type 1 and urban type 0 are very dissimilar. Why? Because they meet up at this point, right? You try to merge them, urban type 1, you have to follow up the labyrinth here in a sense, and you can only go at this point at the level in which you meet urban type 0. So you see that it is very high on the y-axis, meaning that it is very dissimilar. All right, so the bottom line of the dendrogram is fundamentally important in urban morphometrics. The reason why it is so important, that allows you to see things that are happening, allows you to distinguish families, pretty much like families of urban types. So for example, we have here the red part, which is here, is actually a historical part, and there are two such historical parts which apparently are similar in their form, but they are very dissimilar from the blue part, which are the blue parts are here, which are probably industrial estates or something like that. You see? So you got this thing, and you understand that in the dendrogram. You don't understand it only on the map. The other reason why, I'm going to get back to this later, why it is so important dendrogram, it is very similar to what our grandfathers did with butterflies and flowers and insects at the beginning of the science of biological evolution. The biological evolution science started by people observing how things were similar, not things really, but living organisms were similar, birds, famously, in the case of Darwin, and many others, following up and measuring them, and representing the visible traits of their form, and then critically inferring descent out of similarity. So understanding that there was a link between the similarity of their form, which we could measure, and the positioning of these living organisms, their species, in the historical evolution of everything living. That was the shot of genius. That was the link that literally creates the most amazing piece of science that humankind have always ever produced. The idea that there is descent, and this descent shows up in the form of similarity of measurable forms. All right, now let's go more quickly through a number of other things. So this is an example. This is an example where we start from. So we still have those signs on the screen, I'm afraid, but try to cancel them mentally. So this is where we start from. We start from building footprints and street networks, period. That's the only information we have. And height of building, of course, as an attribute of the building footprints. And this is a typical output of the application that you have seen previously. Now this is referred to a transect of the Greater London area in Britain. Here we have computed the 296 characters for each building and its surrounding areas. The entire Greater London area encompasses some 2.5 million buildings. For each of them, 296 characters were measured. The classification is hierarchical according to similarity, as we have seen. The lower the types join up in the dendrogram, and at the top right end of the screen, and the more similar the urban form is, as we just mentioned. And we zoomed in here, and we can see the clustering with more detail and start to visually understand what kind of urban form these types entail. The red urban type, for example, roughly corresponding to the City of London, is characterized by a dense organic urban fabric with the presence of some open spaces. The light blue by a dense fabric built on a more grid-like street pattern. The dark green by medium density and mostly terraced houses. There are also types characterized by a good deal of heterogeneity rather than homogeneity only. This is the case, for example, of the aqua green type, which mixes up large buildings with tower blocks and terrace houses. And you might have noticed that I've been using a natural language to describe these types. And I've been using this natural language here as well. This is part of the same work. It is the profiling of an urban type, the way we profile them. Let's take, for example, an urban type which is called CL02. Doesn't mean anything. And this is actually the light blue one in the map. And it refers to, for example, to Marylebone in London, which is a very well-known quarter in the City of London, very successful. We can calculate the characters that are most distinctive of this type, which means those features of urban form that more than others make this urban type unique. They make the unique identity of it. And in this case, the type is characterized by a dense urban fabric with street canyons enclosed between high built-up fronts, buildings with many courtyards, and large extents of plots occupied by buildings, so a high plot coverage ratio, right? So, and this is the translation in natural language of the data that we have. And you can see here, that we can calculate statistically what are the top descriptors. So what the descriptors that make this urban type specifically distinctive, unique compared to others. And same thing here, but with a quite different urban type. This urban type 3, okay, I'm not going to get into that, you understand the concept. So we still have the most distinctive characters. And these characters actually can describe very nicely the unique characteristic of this place. And we can use, again, the natural language from these characters to make this description more meaningful. Moreover, in this slide, you can see the combination of the London Transit we just saw with another one, which is relative to the city of Northampton in the East Midlands. And notice that urban types in both cases are color-coded along the same spectrum in a unified dendrogram. So we got one dendrogram for two different cities. That means that urban types that are displayed with similar colors are in fact characterized by a similar urban form across different cases, across different cities. And for example, we have the most historical urban types here, which have a purple color in both cases. And we see that these include both the central part of London and the historical core of Northampton. They encompasses both of them. In this case, since we have extracted the form code of urban types, now we can play with them and ask the numbers to reveal not so obvious spatial relationship. For example, we compare two urban types with each other in order to determine what characters do they have most in common and what differentiate them the most. The cases are roughly corresponding to Marylebone again in London and Hopping Hill in Northampton. And on the left, we see that at the top of the characters are most similar across both cases, and at the bottom, those that are most dissimilar in both cases. For example, all the two types have similar street length and number of buildings per meter of street ledge. They differ substantially in terms of block area and occupation of the cell, which is again the building coverage ratio. Right, so here you can see the taxonomy of Bologna. These are all cases we have developed in the last 3 or 4 years. And in this case, I'm going to show you the case of Bologna in Italy, and this is not the largest application of the method at all. You have just seen the Greater London area, which was 2.5 million buildings. So this is actually a mid-scale or even a small-scale case. And indeed, and to reiterate one of the main points of this work, we can scale up this analysis to the regional and national level and even beyond that. Martin, to go back to the example I was making before, is covering now these 4 territories in Central Europe, which are all the national territories of Austria, Germany, Czechia, and Poland, Slovakia, and Lithuania, for a total number of buildings of 80 millions, more than that, actually slightly more than that. And by the end of the year, he is confident he can sum up other national territories like the ones of Belgium, the Netherlands, France, and Spain. And all of that building by building. And okay, we're going to talk about that later in the conversation. Martin's part of the Urban Evo Devon project that is now taking off in Vienna, which I will touch upon at the very end, if we have time. Otherwise, happy to delve into that later in the question and answer time, if you are interested to have more news about it. In the meanwhile, I'm showing Bologna here because we found, in this case, the best quality data we ever found, which included the cadastral parcels. In this case, we used the actual cadastral parcels with an ID which was attributed to parcels belonging to the same building, so we could merge them. As you can see, the taxonomy captures the character areas of the city beautifully, showing a strong relationship with its historical urbanization process. And this is, of course, something expected, as the link between historical origins and the form characters is, in fact, a pillar of urban morphology theory, has always been since the 60s. And yet there we have the evidence of it. Let's not forget that there is absolutely nothing in the data. There's nothing in the data about the historical origins or even the sheer land use of buildings. There's nothing about it. It is only pure space, only space only. And so seeing the machine clustering, it's always sort of mesmerizing for me to see these results every time we have them, because the machine is a machine and there's no, again, no information at all of historical nature or land use, only the pure form of the building and the street network period. That's all what we have. So talking of validation, if Bologna was a particular quality demonstration, the correlation between urban types actually pops up all the times, everywhere in our analysis. Here is the regional case of Puglia, in which we had actually very bad data to start with. For example, we didn't have the data on the height of the buildings, and yet you can see that there is a clear geography here, which distinguishes very well between central cities and countryside, etc. Now notice that we make no distinction on what is urban and what is not urban upfront. There's no upfront classification of that. Everything comes as an output of the analysis. So we have urban types which are actually sitting in the countryside. So they're not urban at all. And you have, in this case, is very typically you have a sparse, formation of buildings which are related to the conduction of the agricultural uses of the fields. And the machine recognizes those as a particular urban type. Of course, they are not urban, but this is how we call it. Okay, so this is another example, just flying over it, Lichfield in England. This was actually the first time we collaborated with a big architectural firm, BDP, which is one of the largest architectural firms based in England, but actually operational all over the globe. And they called us to help them in the classification of the city, the district, actually not just the city, the district of Lichfield in UK. And actually we are working with them starting now on the city of Leeds, just news of coming last week. We're going to do the same for the city of Leeds, which is very interesting, and so on. And you're going to understand in a moment why this is important in England. Just be patient, and if in a few slides we are going to delve into that. Talking of validation, we have been spending considerable efforts in the last 4 or 5 years to realize validation studies of our taxonomy. What do I mean with validation studies? Right, here you can see a work we recently published on urban form and social deprivation in Isfahan, for example, in Iran. And another one on urban form and COVID cases of death and cases and death in the Greater London area. And this is what I mean by validation. So what the machine puts out is an identification of urban types, but it is just a boundary. Is that a historical medieval core? Is that a first expansion, in Victorian times? Is that a rural area? What kind of rural area? Is that a tourist area developed for tourist reasons? So all of that is not in the data. In order to make sense of the data, you need to pair them up with everything else you can distinguish in cities: economy, environment, energy, health, like in the case of COVID, for example, or in fact, historicity, which is another way of validating the data. So what we have, and pay attention to that, we have that for the very first time in history. We have the ability now to explore the contribution of urban form to whatever dynamics occur in cities, whatever: traffic, health, microeconomy, which means prosperity, for example, or lack of, and so on, you name it. If you have the data for that, we can cross-compare with urban form and see if urban form plays any role in determining, in the case of COVID, in determining the number of cases and the severity of those cases, number of deaths for COVID in London. And actually, in that study in particular, the results were somehow very surprising, or I would say controversial, even though in fact it was not surprising to me at all. Okay, if you want, we can discuss that in the question time. Now, this is about coding, urban design coding. What does that have to do with everything I've been talking about so far? It has a lot to do with that. It is actually the reason why we started investigating the matter. Now, if I am too late in my presentation, please let me know. Otherwise, I'm going to keep going with this pace.
Maybe we might have to move a bit faster so that even Paul and you can have a dialogue.
Okay, cool. How much time do we have still?
Maybe 5 to 7 minutes more.
Okay, good. Right, so what you can see here, I'm going to fly on this. What you can see here is an example, is a case study from England, where I work, where we work. We are based in England, in Scotland, actually, but it is the same in the UK, let's say. So I actually live in England and work in Scotland. So this is what's going on in England this moment. The government of the UK, the past UK government, and equally the new UK government, which is a unique case in politics in which a new government of the opposite side of the spectrum actually is continuing rather than discontinuing a policy of the previous one that they replaced. So in this case, the policy we are talking about is the policy of the National Model Design Code Initiative. National Model Design Code Initiative was launched by the Conservative government, and then until last year, then after the election that occurred last year, the new Labour government is continuing this policy, which is based on the characterization, in fact, of cities. So what does that mean? It means that you have to, okay, let's fly over this and go right here. Sorry, I'm hearing background noise. All right, so let's move on. This is what they do. This is what the UK government wants the local authorities, all the more than 300 local authorities in the country, to do as a matter of urgency. So they want the local authorities to characterize their territory, which means recognize the different types, different urban types, in fact, which is exactly what we are doing with urban morphometrics, and to do so in a way which is conducive to coding new expansions or interventions of urban regenerations, right? How do you do that? You do that by, again, by measuring urban form. Well, we do that by measuring urban form. In many cases, in most cases, this is done out of, if you like, your own vision and your own urban theories. For example, you may want to identify in the city, let's say that this is the city of Lichfield. It is not, but just for the sake of the argument, that you want to identify the high-rise city, the town, city center city, the industrial areas city. These are all types of urban form. And you conceptualize them in a diagram like this one. And out of your conceptualization, you derive some numbers. For example, you want a certain density in that urban type. You got higher density here than you have here, right? You may be a higher coverage ratio of the plot here than you have here. And you extract that from your own diagrams that you design on the ground of your own experience. What we do is that we do exactly the same, but actually we measure things on the ground at a very, very large scale. And we do that in the same very moment in which the machine itself, not us, identifies the urban types. And it does so on the ground of the description, the numerical description of each and every building and their own context. Now, this policy And the urban design coding is at the heart, as we speak in England, it is at the heart of the most profound, the largest reformation of the planning system since its inception in 1947. The vastest reformation of the planning system taking place as we speak around this thing of characterization of urban form, urban design codes, which are not the same thing as the characterization, but they are derived from that, they are informed by it. Okay. So, okay, let me close it up here. Then if you want again, we can go and look into that more profoundly. One thing I want to mention though is that sorry.
Your mobile is cracking.
Yep, big noise in this very moment.
Or you need to mute.
I hear a huge noise.
Or you need to mute it.
Hello? Can you hear me? Shall I stop? I hear a big noise, but if I have to continue, let me know.
Mayurish, like push.
Hello?
हमारे यहाँ से बहुत आवाज आ रहा था.
Good? Now it is good. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Yes, yes, yes.
Can I keep going?
Yes, yes, please.
All right. So quickly, what I wanted to point out at this point is that the importance and the opportunity which is raised by this sort of way of delivering master plans, for example, for cities, which is a professional undertaking. The importance of this process which is happening in England is in this moment, and the way it correlates to our work here is that it is all about urban morphology being integrated in the planning system, and not just in the planning system itself, which is what is happening in England, but also, and as a consequence of that, integrated into the education of planners and especially urban designers. And it wouldn't be harmful to architects as well. I'm going back to this later, probably in the question and answer. So the way we educate the professionals of tomorrow, and the way it means it may have an impact in the current curricula at the higher education level, and effectively it will shape a different generation of professionals tomorrow. And this is needed. And again, the core of it is the integration of urban morphology in the curricula. And I think this is something that we probably will have the chance to discuss at the conference, perhaps, and certainly it is something that Ombretta is going to talk about in the next webinar on April the 10th. All right, let's not talk about this. I would perhaps stop here if you then want me to talk about the evolution, the formation of a new science of urban form evolution, then I can do that, or otherwise we are going to touch upon other aspects of the matter. Thank you very much. I will stop here.
Thank you. Paul.
Yeah, Mayurish, is there any background noise coming from my end?
Yes, there is a certain kind of white noise kind of situation. Now we can hear you. No,
Now you can hear me?
There's still some kind of disturbance.
Because I'm alone in this room. Any better now? Any better now?
No.
No, okay. Okay, then I'll have to try logging from another computer probably. Maybe that might help.
Maybe you can just log in through your cell phone.
Yeah, let me just change my computer. Just let me.
Yes.
By the time you just
Just give him 2 minutes to kind of shuffle into his another computer. I think there is some kind of disturbance which he's also not able to figure out.
Maybe if you may try to de-share me, because I'm not sure how I can. Oh, yeah, it is here. Sorry, I will do it myself if I can. Right.
Just give him 2 minutes. So maybe.
I see the 48 people have survived my my presentation. This is a good number.
Is this better?
Yeah, yeah. Yes, it's better now.
This is better. Probably it's because of the computer, I think. Some noise is coming. Okay. Sergio, thank you. Thank you for a very powerful presentation and a very powerful provocation. Like what I'll try to do is I'll try to probably contextualize it and I'll try to link it to probably our experiences from the city and also like because I know that this audience is a like very intelligent audience comprising of mainly of teachers, of students, a lot of us actually are, and I'll try to relate it to the experience of what actually coming from this city we experience. So first of all is your telling us to adopt a evolutionary approach, which is very different from like a lot of the trainings that we go through in our colleges of architecture, where we are always trained to understand the whole idea of architectural projects being more as like finished products. And here you are telling us actually to take an evolutionary approach. Okay, which is something I believe, something which I agree that of as your standpoint of like that evolutionary approach is something which can help us to better understand our experience in larger cities. So the question is, how can we and what does it mean to take this evolutionary approach? What does it mean to the training of an architect? Like through your process, what you showed us that you are very like scientific, what you call as evidence based. Okay, you're very scientific. You were looking at clearly like nearly 74 matrix. That's what you said about which a lot of us do through our own experience. So this whole approach of being scientific, okay, like we architects generally take the position of the creator. Okay, we always think that we are the creators. Okay, but whole idea of before creating, like understanding and the process of how you like quantify cities, how you understand cities, a more empathetic approach to it, okay, is something you are suggesting. Okay, so what does it again mean for this whole idea of like the training of architects, training of us as people who understand that we are the people who actually are creating the cell, but the impact is much higher when we create these cells, when we multiply these cells. Okay, we are actually multiplying our city, and this is so evident in our city because today in a city like Mumbai, each of our plots are going for redevelopment. Okay, lot of our urban neighborhoods, okay, which had a typical urban form, they are changing fast, changing very, and that's a part of the evolutionary process. But what does it mean? Like you spoke about this whole aspect of validation, and you spoke of like, well, you have to validate it with our own experience on ground, that certain urban forms have positive impact, certain urban forms have negative impact. Now, what does this mean in terms of like understanding these matrix that we are evolving? Okay, so that we don't actually create the same negative experiences in cities where like urban forms, though we are creating the cell, when they multiply together, they must not be the best of experiences. So with that understanding, like uh, Sergio, if you can elaborate on this whole aspect of what does it impact, how does it impact into the teaching of architecture and architectural education, and if you can actually like more so talk like the impact of architecture, because I know that a lot of us are architects, a lot of us are people who believe that our designs like remain with us. We as creators, whatever we create signatures, we create icons, but the impact is far reaching, because when we multiply, okay, we are creating what you call as the urban tissue. So if you can talk about that, I think that will help like a lot of us get provoked and probably ask more questions. So, Sergio.
Yeah, well, you have been touching an incredibly deep point in the conversation that would deserve probably a couple of weeks just to scratch the surface of. What I can say in a few minutes, it will probably result a bit superficial, but of course, this is what we can do in this setting only. So let me try to figure out a few fundamental things. Caniggia and Maffei, for example, who are among the fathers of urban morphology in Italy, they came about with a notion they called coscienza spontanea, which in English sounds like spontaneous consciousness. So the idea that pre-modern cities were actually the realization of evolution, or an evolutionary thinking and evolution in a cultural system such as the city operates by imitation, right? Not really imitation in the way we commonly use this term. So it's not about doing something like imitating a drawing, for example. It can be that thing, but it's not really referred to that. Imitation means the way you imitate the sound of your parents' voice when you are just born and you are trying to make sense of the universe. And then you learn how to speak, you learn a language, and you grow up with that understanding. And language then creates you in a closed loop. This is the kind of imitation that really functions at the anthropological level and creates the evolution of cities. Now, this sort, for example, when you have to design a building which is a building like a church, for example, or a school, and you look around for understanding from your predecessors how to do it. And this is a mastery that you acquire by working with others. And then you fundamentally imitate, you achieve this, this knowledge by imitating what those people before you did. And then you keep doing your stuff. And then maybe you do it slightly differently. And maybe such as those variations have success, and other people will imitate them from you, or they would fail. And then in this case, everybody's going to blame you and nobody's going to do that anymore. But this is a typical evolutionary process, right? Isn't it? And the languages, in fact, have been studied in evolutionary terms by Mark Pagel. And we have been writing a paper with him, which is still very dear to me, like a few years ago. And so that makes perfect sense from the point of view of an evolutionary biologist. It makes far less sense to us because we got resistance to accept this point of view for historical reasons, which we may touch upon later on. So what does mean? It means that pre-modern cities used to follow up principles of evolution naturally, let's say, by spontaneous consciousness. People were not even aware that they were doing something like following evolution. They just did it. Now, things got changed like everything else. Well, of course, it's not a matter of something happening overnight, but we can, at least in the West area of the world, we can say that the end of the Second World War was the beginning of an actual revolution in the way we build cities. This evolution in urban forms comes up regularly in our diagrams, in our studies on the urban form. There's regularly one family of the pre-modern in the dendrogram. No, one family that covers all the pre-modern buildings, another one that covers, which is the most different of all. So there is, using evolutionary terms, there has been actually a bifurcation in the way we build cities before and after the Second World War. That's quite clear, and it comes out everywhere. So what has happened there? It is a complete change of the mode of production of everything, right? So the implementation of hyper-industrialization. Of course, industrialization started before, but hyper-industrialization kicked in after the Second World War, at least in the West, and then permeated everything of itself. The way we eat, the way we talk, the way we dress, the way we speak, the way we build houses, the way we design the built environment, the way we design buildings, and everything changed abruptly. The mechanism of imitation changed. Rather than being based on slow understanding, it all of a sudden became based on visuals and communication means. I don't have to add much about it because we all know that, right? So the mechanism itself, the core of the evolutionary mechanism, got, if you like, disrupted in a bad way. It says not disrupted because it was a positive innovation. Maybe it was positive or negative. There's no connotation or judgment here. It just happened. So it was completely destroyed and replaced by a quite different process of imitation. That, of course, part of that was the creation of courses in architecture or urban design, which in fact, though we had, of course, courses and programs in architecture and urban design before the Second World War, but they were really sporadic. The vast majority of the courses we have now were born after the Second World War. Modernism as a intellectual approach to the subject was born before the Second World War, but actually was applied after the Second World War. That was a moment in which modern planning and design took over the entire system of communication and teaching, for example. So everything changed at that point, and we can't rely now on spontaneous consciousness anymore to create cities which are human, which are beautiful, in the sense that they work for everybody, for the businesses, for the people, for the passers-by, etc. So to cut this story very short, this is not what I'm talking about when I'm talking evolutionary approach is everything but an anti-planning agenda. We need planning to create beautiful cities and cities at work, but we need the right planning. And this is the point. We have to reform our planning system, I think, by discussing and tackling all these elements I just very quickly pointed out, if we want to acquire the knowledge that can replace the spontaneous consciousness we have irremediably lost, because we have. Sorry, I'm hearing now some background voices. Maybe
I
somebody
request all the participants to mute their mic.
Yeah, thank you. Right, first of all, it's not an anti-planning agenda. It is not. There's another consideration regarding this. Because very often, any appeal to an evolutionary approach to architecture and design ends up into an anti-planning or anti-design agenda. This is not the case. Just look at the vast majority of the historical centers of European cities. Most of them were born out of military barracks established in the Roman times. It's also common in North Africa. Everywhere the Roman Empire was present 2,000 years ago, they built cities and streets. That's what they did all the times. And those cities started as military barracks. A city like Bologna, which I just showed, was born as a military barracks. Along the Via Emilia, where my hometown actually is, linking Milan with Rimini to the southeast and the Adriatic Sea, it has cities every one day of march, because that was that was exactly the distance at which the ancient Romans created their military barracks, right? And what is more rigid and more planned than a military barracks? Nothing is. It is a chessboard ruled by defense reasons. And yet, 2,000 years later, we have these magnificent places that everybody of us perceives as, naturally grown or spontaneous urban environment we are all very dear about. And people takes charter flights from the other side of the ocean to come and visit, and so on and so forth, right? Venice is another such town. It was never been a military barrack, but was there by defense reasons because there were invasions. So the people in the mainland had to find a refuge in the place that nobody wanted to live in because they were too disastrous in terms of health, which was Venice. And yet, 1.5 millennia later, we have Venice. And in the 17th century, 18th century, Venice was one of the capitals of the world and one of the most evolved, the most sophisticated cities on the planet. So you see, what I'm trying to say is that at all levels, at the levels of the building, all the way to the level of the design of the streets, the most important thing is position ourselves as designer into an evolutionary framework. For example, just to be clear, to me, that doesn't mean embarking into generative or AI-driven generative process or computer-aided process of generative form. This is not the point to me. It should be humans determining the form. But we should understand where technology can help. And that's what we did with this thing, where technology can help in recovering and making newly available by scientific investigation, because the science must help us in doing that, right? How we can recover the collective wisdom that is embedded in everything we do, including the modern parts of our cities, including them, right? And because that would make available that knowledge to us in a way which, this is my hope, could help us reconstitute it by science, what we have lost by, delving into a different civilization, which is what happened after the Second World War, right? We have lost something. It's quite clear we have lost something there. For example, we have lost the ability to produce the cultural heritage of tomorrow. Very rarely what we are building today, is good enough to be praised by the next generations. In the West, at least, we are witnessing this now because we are already like 50, 70 years after, this first arrival, if you like, this first revolution, which was modern design and modern planning. Okay, I got nothing against urban design and modern urban design and planning, but we have to understand, we have to use what is good, and we have to use. I make no difference between them, but there's no judgment here. But we need to understand. We need to make that. We need to make all cultural formations available to us, and the effort we are making is that in that direction. And we have to study the mechanism by which our students can get that information and make it, and use it so recreating the link we have lost with our own cultural evolution.
Okay. Sergio, you have some questions in your chat box. Let's take the first one. The first one is by PhD students at the LJ University.
Sir, hello.
Hello. First, we will take the first question. I think that's a question by a PhD student at LJ University. So we will first finish that question. Okay.
Sure.
So the question is like, how can urban morphometrics be adapted or applied in smaller cities and towns? She's talking about, especially he says where the data availability and infrastructure might be limited. So that's something I believe, Sergio, if you can take that, that should be easy for you. Are there any open source tools or platforms you would recommend for students and young professionals to start exploring urban form and evidence-based urban design? So these are the two questions. So Sergio, you can take them. First, we'll answer them.
Right. So it's a very interesting question. Thank you for asking this. First of all, I would, if I had to lead a course, which I do, here in Glasgow, of course. My students don't learn to use the morphometric still. The reason is that you don't start playing, Beethoven from, the symphony. You start playing the piano. You don't start playing the piano with Beethoven. You start playing the piano by making the scales. So you have to progress into it to understand really the full situation. So my suggestion is to start with the local urban code. And the local urban code is exactly something that you can do at the level of the block, or at the level of the neighborhood, but that entails moving on yourself and drawing what you're seeing and measuring what you're drawing and doing that in a way which is structured and it is numerical. This is where we started. And unless you are talking of a program of 2 years, for example, in which you would have a first year, which is really about geodata sciences, etc. So you build up the skills. And then you may progress into urban morphometrics in year 2. This is something we could think about. In fact, I'm talking this language because we have been thinking a lot about this here. Unless you have this opportunity, then I wouldn't suggest to go straight into urban morphometrics because you wouldn't know what you're doing. As simple as that. The most important part is understanding what is relevant in the form of the city and what you should look at to design, and more important, hugely important, what you shall never look to design. Because you should leave as much as you can, you should be as lean as possible in your determinations, in your coding, to leave the larger possible room for architects, for all stakeholders, including customers or developers or local authorities or everybody else, to determine and continue to determine what's going on at the plot level, right? So that is very important to me.
Okay.
And that you can do with the local urban code. And of course, then developing. Now, regarding the data, yeah, there are problems with data. We have been working in India, in Kochi in particular, in the past. And in that case, we had data created by students in 3 years before we landed there. So that we were very lucky to have that data. There are areas in the planet in which data are very scarce or very dishomogeneous. We know that perfectly. And one way to deal with that is to polish and clean as far as you can the repositories that you have. It's not really, in many cases, not enough. The other way is to use Earth observation technology and start using data, creating your own data by the satellite images. And those are available, and that field is progressing a lot, very fast. There are repositories of information, as you're saying now, that were not even thinkable 5 years ago. I just mentioned the building height. The building heights are now available all over the planet for free, right? So you can just use it. And there are, of course, there is, how it is called, forgive me the names. Well, you have all the streets, which are mapped. It will come up later. These are grassroots sort of information that people map in their own neighborhoods and providing the mapping on their website. I have to say, a lot of urban morphologists now using that data, but that data in many areas is just too dishomogeneous to be used correctly. Just too dishomogeneous. There are areas in which data are raised very nicely, and others in which it's very rude, very rough, and just not comparable. So if you want to work at a little scale, at a small scale, you can do that. You can do that. It's not too difficult. I mean, in the scale of the small town, the village and the small town. If you raise above the scale, then you have to look at Earth observation cases, perhaps, unless you have funding to generate a task force of 30 people, shape them, educate them, and then let them raise the data by hand, which is what never happens, really.
Okay, Sergio, and I would also urge Taha, that's how I call you, so that we can probably become a part of this workshop that Sergio is conducting, and I believe a lot of like your questions can be answered there. Like you will get a possible experience of how data can be created. In today's day and time, remember, with OpenStreetMaps, a lot of the data is available. And what Sergio has been also urging, like you can contribute to OpenStreetMap. A lot of your students can contribute to OpenStreetMap, and that's how data can be created, which is open for everybody.
Yeah,
But
that's
yes,
OpenStreetMap is what I meant. Sorry, it just
yeah,
didn't just the name didn't come up.
yeah. And so next question. First of all, I think Mr. Mansoor has a question.
Yes, sir. Yes,
So
sir.
yes. So please
Th-
ask
th-
the question. Please go ahead
Thank,
now.
thank you, Dr. Sergio, Professor
Thank
of
you.
Urban Design. I have, in fact, two questions. Since urban space encompasses more than just geometry. Therefore, I would like to explore how can urban morphometric incorporate non-geometric aspects such as social networks, cultural landscapes, and intangible urban qualities. And the second question is to what extent can urban morphometric effectively capture the lived experiences of urban space,
The
which
new, sorry, the new what?
lived experiences, lived
Uh-huh.
experience of urban spaces, which in fact encompasses the subjective, emotional, and social dimension of urban life, considering its inherent focus on objective measurements.
Okay, so the first one was about intangible qualities of the space. All right, there are two answers. One, there is an entire area of science which looks at those intangible elements and measuring them via different forms of social. This is a very cool part of social media, right? Or exploring natural language, etc. There are all these experiences going on. At the moment, they don't even go close to really describing the complexity of those intangible qualities of urban space. They don't even get close to it. In terms of the urban morphometrics, we just don't do that. Those intangible things don't play any role in urban morphometrics. They're not part of the data. That doesn't mean that they are not important. Actually, we strive to take them out of the data in order to make them important, because then we can compare for example, the feelings of communities to the urban form that we can measure, right? So for us, those intangible elements are all part of the validation process. So we don't measure them, somebody else will, or if you like, we can put up a project in which we do both things. Very happy to participate. That's what we do all the times, right? But it is not part, we don't define the urban types on the ground of the intangible elements. We define them only on the ground of what is tangible, visitable. You can touch it and you can measure it, right? Regarding the intangible, if you find a way, for example, by putting up a local laboratories with the communities and and asking questions or delivering survey, for example, my PhD of mine is actually doing exactly that thing as we speak. She's from Saudi Arabia. She's on one side delivering the urban morphometrics of the whole territory of Saudi Arabia, and on the other side, she's delivering a quality of life investigation by producing surveys to local communities. And then we are going to put together these two things and see which urban forms look to be more correlated to certain feelings. For example, the feeling of feeling at home, right? Or the feeling of being in a place which is served nicely, or a strong community. Or just the feeling of happiness. What more intangible than a feeling of happiness? And yet it is 30 years that a part of science is investigating, or environmental psychology are investigating, how we can measure happiness. And I remember an old conference years and years ago. I was a young researcher at that point who was very interested in these aspects. And I learned in a conference that in the end, when you want to measure, the quality of life of people, just ask them how Well, there are two elements. One, how long are you living? So the average life expectancy, let's say. And on the other hand is, how happy do you feel you are? And that's what they did. They were questioning people. How happy are you? Not from 1 to 10. As simple as that. So it's extremely intangible. But the real question for us is, how can you correlate all that to urban form? How can you actually explore how urban form is contributing to that? That's our bit of the work. I don't know if that answers the questions, but there was a second question, which was about new urban forms. Yes, is that right? This second part of the question was about new urban form. Well, again, we cannot measure what is not existing, but we measure everything which is existing without any pre-constituted judgment on it of any sort. So if there are the new parts of cities are measurable pretty much as all the other parts of cities, they are just a different urban type, right? So what we do, we take that urban type, we take all the other urban types, and then we measure, for example, how people feel happy in them rather than in the others, or how much they drive the car in both, or how much, what is the average temperature or the heat bubble in those two different areas. We measure everything we can measure and correlate that to urban form, including modern and new urban forms. But we can't do that with form that still don't exist. This is for the architects to find out, and for, of course, urban designers that all the time come with new modular cities. Let me say one thing, though, let me say that perhaps anecdotically. When I was a kid, I used to go on vacation in Sardinia. It's a fantastic place. I would suggest everybody to go there. And so that entailed taking a ferry. And then one day there was a lot of people pressing to go on that ferry, and the ferries were packed with people. And there was a night to spend on the ferry. And so we were kids, so we were there with our sleeping bag, etc. And everybody was fighting for the places on the back of the ship. And I thought, oh, these are all stupid. I'll go to the front of the ship because nobody actually wants to go there. So I went there and I laid down my sleeping bag, etc. And as the ship went out of the harbor and started traversing the Tyrrhenian Sea, I understood why nobody wanted to go to the front, because it was bloody windy. It was a disaster. And then, middle of the night, without sleeping a minute, I had to roll up my sleeping bag and go to the back of the ship, and humiliated to the deep, profoundly, to understand that the stupid there was me. It wasn't all the other people. So this is to say that innovation is always. I'm the last one who wants to blame innovation. I love innovation, but there is always the chance that you are the stupid in the end, and you discover that too late. You see. So the compound of the urban designers, the master planners, etc., the planners themselves, the architects are coming up furiously with innovations of all sorts. We have no lack of innovation in design. But what will make justice of this would select out the innovation which will be, established at the end and will make for the cities of the future is not us. And it is a mechanism which is evolutionary, I think. And so we have to be conscious of that, aware of that, in the moment in which we look at the innovation that might come up from our department or our students, and in a sense, these things come up willing or not. You don't have to search for them. They will come up willing or not. They will come up because of technological innovation, because of different materials, because of all sorts of things, changes in the economy, appropriateness of the chains of supply of things. All of this, the incredible complexity of life comes up and determines what works and what doesn't. So that's my answer. I don't know if that actually.
Okay, thank you, Sergio. Sergio, like as I'm being told, we are running short of time actually also. Though I've asked if there are any questions from the audience, there seems to be none. And well, if there are more questions, I would urge the participants and the audience that they can probably join Sergio's workshop, which is happening as a part of the larger event. So that could be a possible area where you could interact with Sergio. You could learn more about the process, because I personally I believe this is absolutely important, because as we are creating cities like where I come from, Mumbai, okay, where we are creating cities which are based with notions of profit, okay. And Sergio, more that you speak of resilience, how do you build, how do you manage them, how do you balance them together? And it's all about urban form, it's all about coding, it's all about urban codes which generates urban form finally. So these are very critical questions, I believe a lot of us, both as architects as well as urban designers, because it concerns us as architects when we are doing these like design of these cells, so-called cells. Like, how do you manage them, how do you balance them, and how do you create a city which is like looking at resilience as well as money making together? So I think these are very important questions.
Very important.
Very
Very
important
important.
questions. Yeah, Sergio, you might be obviously dealing with them in the workshop. So, but I understand there's a shortage of time, so I won't take any more questions. Mayuresh, is over to you.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Paul. Thank you so much, Sergio. I think it was really a great experience for all of us to engage in such kind of a discussion, one. And second is, I think as an urban practitioner, what I'm realizing is that there is more room to innovation, more room to, analytics, and more room towards kind of looking into the future, how urban form should take place. So I think everybody needs to kind of take that up as an experimentation process, at least in the studios or in their researches. So I think that would be one of the most key takeaways for me. So thank you so much, Sergio, for giving your extensive output towards the
No,
today's.
it's me thanking you. It's been a great experience, and yeah,
Yes.
and
Uh,
looking forward to see all of you shortly.
Definitely. And we are also looking forward to work with you. So really, thank you so much. Just on a ending note, kindly mark the date that we have webinar number 8 coming up on date 10th of April 2025, time 4:30 p.m. Topic: Transition in Urban Design, Time, Resilience, and Responsibilities by Dr. Ombretta Romis, leader in architecture and urban design at Strathclyde University. So please mark the date, and again, see you all on the same topic and on the same discussion through transformations. Thank you so much. Sergio, thank you once again. Paul, thank you so much once again.
Thank you. Thank you. We can leave now.
Yes, you can.